When Daniel stood up from the table, I thought he was about to make a toast. Everyone was smiling, the smell of roasted turkey filled the room, and laughter echoed across the dining room. It was supposed to be a perfect Thanksgiving. My parents had flown in from Texas, my sister and her kids were running around, and I had spent all day cooking, believing this holiday might finally bring us closer again. But when Daniel reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope, I knew something was wrong. The air shifted. His face was serious, almost cold. He slid the papers across the table toward me. For a second, I thought it was a card, maybe even something sweet. But when I opened it, I saw the word divorce. My hands went numb. My mom gasped. My dad stood up so fast his chair fell backward. Everyone just stared at me. I couldn't speak. My throat closed, and my heart pounded so loudly I could barely hear what he was saying. "I can't do this anymore, Claire," he said, his voice flat and rehearsed. "I've been unhappy for a long time." It felt like the room tilted. I looked at the man I had spent 10 years of my life with and didn't recognize him. My mind went blank. My father told him to leave, but Daniel didn't even flinch. He just said, "I wanted to do it now in person, so you'd know I'm serious." And then he walked out. The sound of the door closing felt final. My sister tried to comfort me, but I couldn't move. I just sat there staring at the papers, not even crying, just frozen. Everything around me blurred. The food was still warm on the table, but no one could eat. Thanksgiving was ruined in an instant. That night, after everyone left, I sat in the dark living room staring at the cold turkey on the counter. My wedding ring felt heavier than ever. I kept asking myself what I did wrong. We had our problems, sure, but I thought we were trying to fix them. We'd been to counseling, we'd talked about starting over. I believed him when he said he wanted to make things work. But I guess he'd already made his decision long before Thanksgiving. As the hours passed, anger slowly replaced the shock. How could he humiliate me like that? In front of my family? What kind of person plans something so cruel? I felt small and broken, but deep down a quiet fire started to grow. I didn't know it yet, but that night was the beginning of something new. I told myself that no matter how bad it hurt, I wouldn't let this be the end of my story. Daniel thought he had destroyed me, but he had no idea who I could become when everything else was gone. That night, I stopped being his wife and started being me again. Thanksgiving had always been the one day that made everything feel okay. No matter how stressful the year was, that day meant family, food, and peace. I loved how the house smelled when I baked. Warm cinnamon, roasted turkey, and sweet potatoes. My parents had flown in from Texas, my sister Rachel brought her kids, and the house was full of laughter and noise. I wanted everything to be perfect. Maybe if the day went well, Daniel and I could finally feel normal again. Things between us had been tense for months. There were arguments about money, his long hours, and the way he had become distant. But recently, he'd started acting like the man I fell in love with again. Helping me with dinner, complimenting me on how good the house looked, and even joking around with my dad. When he kissed my forehead that morning and said, "Let's make today special," I believed him. I wanted to. All day, I moved around the kitchen, making sure nothing burned and everything looked perfect. I made my mom's recipe for pumpkin pie and the creamy mac and cheese Daniel loved. He even offered to help set the table, which he hadn't done in years. Watching him laugh with my sister and pour drinks made me think maybe we were finding our way back. I told myself that maybe all couples went through rough patches, and this was ours. My parents looked happy too. They'd always worried about how distant Daniel had become, but even they seemed relieved to see him smiling. My dad said, "Looks like things are turning around for you too," and I nodded, not wanting to jinx it. I remember glancing at Daniel across the table and thinking, this might be the start of something new. Dinner was almost ready, and everyone gathered around the table. The kids were laughing, the candles flickered, and soft music played in the background. It felt warm, comfortable, safe. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't nervous about what Daniel would say or do. He was calm, attentive, even charming. He told stories from work, made my mom laugh, and complimented my cooking. I felt this small spark of hope light up inside me. Maybe this was the reset we needed. Maybe we could fix what had been broken. I had spent weeks planning this dinner to make sure everything was perfect, not just for my family, but for us. I wanted him to see how hard I was trying, how much I still believed in us. I didn't notice the way he kept glancing at his watch, or the way his expression sometimes shifted when he thought no one was looking. I was too busy soaking in the rare moment of peace, the sound of family, the taste of comfort. I didn't know that while I was trying to save us, he was already planning the moment that would tear it all apart. That Thanksgiving was going to be unforgettable, but not for the reason I hoped. The moment felt unreal. 1 second, everyone was laughing and passing around plates of food, and the next, Daniel stood up with that look on his face, the one that made the room go quiet without him saying a word. I thought maybe he wanted to make a toast. He cleared his throat and said, "Before we eat, I have something important to share." Everyone stopped talking and turned toward him. I smiled nervously, expecting him to say something sweet or meaningful. Maybe he wanted to thank everyone for coming or talk about being grateful for family. But then he reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. His voice didn't shake. His hands didn't tremble. It was like he had rehearsed every second of it. He slid the envelope across the table toward me. For a moment, I didn't move. I just stared at it, confused. My sister looked at me, then at him. My mom's fork froze in midair. I finally picked it up and opened it, still not understanding. The words hit me all at once: petition for divorce. My stomach dropped. The sound in the room disappeared. I looked up at Daniel, hoping it was some terrible joke. But his face was cold, distant. He said, "I've fallen out of love, Claire. I'm done pretending." His tone was flat, like he was reading a business report. My mom gasped, "Daniel, what are you saying?" My dad's face turned red with anger. He pushed his chair back and stood up, fists clenched. But Daniel didn't even look at him. He just looked at me, waiting for me to respond. I couldn't move. My body felt heavy. I tried to speak, but no words came out. My heart was beating so fast I thought I might faint. My hands were shaking so badly I dropped the papers onto the table. The room felt smaller, like the walls were closing in. Rachel stood up and said, "Daniel, not here. Not like this." But he ignored her. "It's better to be honest now than to keep lying," he said calmly. That sentence broke something inside me. The man I had loved for 10 years, the one who had promised to be my partner, had just turned one of my favorite days into the worst moment of my life. My father told him to leave, but he didn't move. He just stood there for a second, watching me, maybe waiting for a reaction that never came. Then he picked up his coat and walked out. The door closed quietly behind him, and it was the loudest sound I'd ever heard. No one spoke. My mom started crying softly. My dad sat back down, trying to comfort her, while my sister came to my side. I just stared at the papers lying on the table between the plates of food and the untouched glasses of wine. The smell of the turkey and pie made me sick. Thanksgiving was supposed to be about family, love, and gratitude. But in a single moment, Daniel had turned it into the day everything fell apart. After everyone left, the house felt painfully quiet. The candles had burned down to stubs, and the food sat untouched on the table. The turkey was cold, the gravy had thickened, and the smell of dinner now made my stomach turn. I sat there alone, staring at the empty chairs where my family had been just hours ago. Their faces kept replaying in my mind, shock, pity, and confusion. No one knew what to say. Daniel had gone upstairs after his dramatic announcement, packed his suitcase, and walked out without looking back. I heard the sound of drawers closing, zippers, and then the front door shutting softly. That was it. 10 years together, gone in a single night. He didn't apologize, didn't explain, just left. I spent that night sitting at the kitchen table, still wearing my apron, staring at the divorce papers. My phone buzzed a few times, texts from my mom and sister checking on me, but I couldn't bring myself to answer. My mind was too full, yet completely blank. How could he humiliate me like that? In front of my family? On Thanksgiving? For days, I barely slept. I went through our house, noticing everything he left behind. His favorite mug, his old jacket, a photo of us on vacation. Each thing felt like a lie now. I replayed every moment from the last few months, trying to see what I had missed. There were late nights at work, phone calls he'd step outside to take, and the sudden change in passwords on his phone. At the time, I had convinced myself I was overthinking. I wanted to believe he was just stressed. But deep down, I had known something was wrong. A week later, the truth came out. I was at work when I overheard 2 coworkers whispering. When I walked in, they froze. That silence told me everything. Later that day, one of them pulled me aside and told me gently, "Claire, I think you should know. Daniel's been seeing Samantha." Samantha, the same woman I had lunch with almost every week. The one who'd asked for advice about her relationship problems. The one who hugged me when Daniel and I were going through our rough patch. My stomach dropped. I felt sick. I trusted her like a friend. I had invited her into my home. And all that time, she was seeing my husband behind my back. That night, I didn't cry. Not anymore. Something in me hardened. The shock and sadness slowly turned into a quiet, steady anger. Not the kind that makes you scream, but the kind that makes you think clearly. I realized crying over him would give him power. He expected me to fall apart, to beg or chase after him. But I wasn't going to do that. So I sat on the edge of my bed, took a deep breath, and made myself a promise. I didn't know how, but one day Daniel would regret what he did. Not because I'd hurt him, but because he'd see what he threw away. I wouldn't stay broken. I would rebuild my life piece by piece, without him. The first few weeks after Daniel left were the hardest. Every morning, I woke up expecting to hear his car in the driveway or his keys in the door, but it never happened. The silence in the house was heavy, almost painful. At first, I kept checking my phone, hoping he'd call, hoping he'd say it was all a mistake. But he didn't. And one morning, I realized I was done waiting. I stopped answering his messages. I stopped replaying old conversations in my head, wondering what I could have done differently. I stopped begging him, even in my thoughts, to come back. It was like taking my first deep breath after months of suffocating. I decided to pour all my energy into myself. I had always put Daniel first, his needs, his moods, his comfort. But now, for the first time, I started thinking about what I wanted. I threw myself into work. Real estate had always been my passion, but I'd let it take a back seat during our marriage. Now, I started showing up early, taking on new clients, and focusing on building something that was mine. Within a few months, I closed some of the biggest deals of my career. My boss even called me unstoppable. I also started therapy. At first, I was nervous. I didn't want to open up to a stranger. But those sessions became my lifeline. My therapist helped me untangle all the pain I had buried, how much I had given, how little I had gotten back, and why I had stayed so long trying to fix something that wasn't mine to fix. She taught me that healing wasn't about pretending I was fine. It was about learning to be okay even when I wasn't. Slowly, I started doing small things that made me happy again. I joined a gym. The first time I walked in, I felt awkward, but over time it became my escape. I ran, lifted, and pushed myself harder each day. The more I moved, the lighter I felt. I also started cooking again, but this time for myself. I bought flowers every weekend, just because I wanted to. Friends began to notice the change. Even people who hadn't seen me in months said I looked different, calmer, stronger. One of Daniel's old friends ran into me at a coffee shop and said, "Wow, Claire, you're glowing lately." I smiled and said, "Yeah, I guess I am." It wasn't about revenge or showing off. It was about finally feeling free. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for anyone's approval. I didn't need Daniel to see my worth. I could see it for myself. I wasn't broken anymore. I was learning who I was, someone stronger than heartbreak, someone who could stand alone and still shine. And deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. It had been a full year since that awful Thanksgiving. By then, my life felt completely different. I had my own apartment, my business was thriving, and I could finally sleep through the night without waking up to old memories. I had made peace with what happened. Daniel had become a chapter one had closed for good. Or so I thought. One evening, as I was finishing some paperwork, my phone buzzed. The name on the screen made my stomach tighten for a second, Daniel. I stared at it for a while before picking up. His voice was hesitant, softer than I remembered. "Hey, Claire. It's been a while," he said, like we were old friends catching up. I didn't say much, just waited for him to continue. He told me things hadn't gone as planned. The friend he had left me for, Samantha, had taken most of his savings, cheated on him with someone from his office, and left. He said he'd lost almost everything and didn't know who to talk to. Then he said the words I never thought I'd hear again. "I miss you. I wish we could try again." For a moment, I just sat there in silence, listening. A year ago, I would have given anything to hear him say those words. I would have taken the blame, made excuses for him, begged for another chance. But now it just sounded empty. I almost laughed, not out of cruelty, but out of disbelief. The man who once humiliated me in front of my family now wanted to come back because his new life had fallen apart. He thought I was still the same woman who cried on the kitchen floor, broken and desperate. But I wasn't her anymore. That version of me was gone. I told him I was glad he had reached out, but I was doing well, better than ever, actually. He asked if we could meet, maybe talk things through as adults. I agreed, not out of interest, but because I wanted closure on my own terms. When we met at a small coffee shop downtown, I saw how much he had changed. He looked tired, older, weighed down by regret. He tried to smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. He talked for a while, about how he missed my cooking, my laugh, the way I kept him grounded. I listened quietly. When he finished, I looked at him and said, "Daniel, I'm not angry anymore. But I've moved on. I've built a life I'm proud of, and you're not part of it." He nodded, trying to hold back his emotions. I could tell he finally understood that the door was closed for good. As I stood up to leave, I felt no sadness, no bitterness, just peace. That moment wasn't about revenge. It was about realizing that I didn't need him to feel whole. He had destroyed something once, but I rebuilt it stronger. And seeing him realize that he had lost me forever was its own quiet kind of justice. When I agreed to meet Daniel for coffee, I didn't plan to make a scene or rub anything in his face. I just wanted to listen and end things properly, once and for all. It had been over a year since the divorce papers, and by that time, my heart felt healed. I was no longer angry, just distant. I could look at him and not feel pain anymore. That in itself felt like a victory. He came in late, just like always, wearing that same nervous smile I used to mistake for charm. His eyes looked tired, like he hadn't slept much. As soon as he sat down, he started talking about how much he had messed up, how lonely he felt, and how he wished he could take everything back. He said losing me was the biggest mistake of his life. I listened quietly, sipping my coffee, not interrupting. There was a time when hearing those words would have made me cry. But now they didn't touch me. I had already cried all my tears. I had already done the hard part, letting go. So I just sat there, calm and steady, while he talked about regrets and second chances. When he finally paused, I smiled softly and said, "I'm seeing someone, Daniel. And I'm happy." He blinked, clearly not expecting that. "You are?" he asked, trying to hide the shock in his voice. "Yes," I said. "His name's Evan. We've been together for a few months now. He's kind, grounded, and he makes me feel safe." It wasn't something I said to hurt him. It was simply the truth. But watching his face fall told me everything. His expression shifted from hope to disbelief, then to quiet regret. He looked down at his coffee, his hands tightening around the cup. For the first time, I think he realized what he had really lost. Evan wasn't like Daniel. He didn't play mind games or make me feel small. He listened, showed up when he said he would, and treated me like a partner, not an option. Being with him reminded me what it felt like to be loved without conditions. That was something Daniel could never give me, because he had never understood what love really meant. Daniel tried to smile again, but it was weak. "I'm glad you're happy," he said quietly, though his eyes told a different story. I nodded, finished my drink, and stood up. "Take care of yourself, Daniel." He watched me walk away, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like the woman he left behind. I felt like the woman who had outgrown him completely. That was my revenge, not anger, not revenge plans, just peace. Watching him sit there, realizing he had traded something real for something shallow, was enough. He would carry that regret, but I wouldn't. I left that coffee shop smiling, knowing he'd never stop wondering what life might have been like if he hadn't handed me those divorce papers that Thanksgiving. And that was the sweetest kind of justice, quiet, calm, and complete. Months went by after that coffee meeting, and life kept getting better. I stayed focused on my work, my friends, and the small joys that made my days peaceful. For the first time in years, my life felt like mine again. No drama, no walking on eggshells, no wondering if I was enough. I had found balance, and I wasn't about to lose it again. I started saving money and eventually bought my own house, a small place with white walls, big windows, and a quiet backyard. It wasn't fancy, but it was perfect for me. I remember walking through the empty rooms the first night barefoot, holding a glass of wine, and thinking I did this. It was my space, my achievement, my fresh start. I began hosting small dinners with my friends. Nothing big, just laughter, food, and warmth. My home became a place filled with happiness and genuine connections. My friends often told me how much lighter and freer I seemed. Even my parents noticed how peaceful I looked when they visited. I had let go of the bitterness that once weighed me down. Daniel tried to reach out again a few months later. He texted me late one night, saying he missed me and wanted to talk just once. I saw the message, read it twice, and then simply put my phone down. I didn't feel anger or sadness, just nothing. I didn't reply, and I didn't need to. Silence became my answer. It's strange how silence can be louder than any words. There was a time when I would have written long messages, tried to explain how much he'd hurt me, or demanded an apology. But not anymore. I didn't owe him anything. Not my words, not my time, not even my attention. The peace I had found was too valuable to trade for old pain. I later heard through a mutual friend that Daniel wasn't doing well. He had lost his job, and his reputation had taken a hit after his messy breakup with Samantha. I didn't feel happy about it, but I also didn't feel sorry for him. He had made his choices, and those choices had consequences. He was living the results of what he had built. I didn't need to ruin him. Life had already done that for me. And honestly, I didn't want revenge anymore. I had outgrown that part of me. What mattered most was that I was happy, really happy. Some nights, I'd sit on my porch with a cup of tea, watching the sun go down, and I'd think about how far I'd come. I wasn't that woman who was left humiliated at a Thanksgiving table anymore. I had rebuilt my life from the ground up, quietly and steadily. And maybe that was the best redemption of all. Not proving him wrong, but proving to myself that I could rise, even after everything burned down. 2 years later, Thanksgiving looked completely different. The same dining table that once witnessed my heartbreak was now surrounded by laughter and warmth again. The same house that once felt heavy with silence was full of life. The air smelled like roasted turkey, sweet potatoes, and pumpkin pie. Just like before, but this time the feeling was peaceful. I had decided that year I was ready to host Thanksgiving again. It wasn't about replacing the past, it was about reclaiming it. I invited my parents, my sister Rachel, her kids, and a few close friends. And sitting across from me at the table was Evan, steady, kind, and the complete opposite of the chaos that used to fill my life. Evan reached across the table, took my hand gently, and smiled. "I'm thankful for you," he said. Those words hit me deeper than he probably realized. For a second, I couldn't even respond. My chest felt warm, and my throat tightened with quiet emotion. 2 years ago, that same table had been the place where my life fell apart. Now it was the place where I felt whole again. As everyone started passing dishes around, laughter filled the room. My dad cracked his usual bad jokes, my sister teased him, and my mom couldn't stop complimenting the food. Everything felt light and easy, like life had exhaled. There was no tension, no pretending, just genuine peace. At one point, I looked around and let it all sink in. The last time I sat there, I had been broken and humiliated. I remembered the shaking in my hands when Daniel handed me those divorce papers, the silence that followed, the shame I thought would never fade. But now, sitting in that same spot, I realized how far I had come. The pain that once defined me was gone, replaced by strength and calm. Evan caught me smiling to myself and asked, "What's that look for?" I laughed softly and said, "Just thinking how thankful I am. For everything." He squeezed my hand, not asking for details. He didn't need to. He knew my story. He knew how hard I had fought to find peace again. After dinner, we all sat in the living room, kids playing with board games, my parents talking about old family memories. The house glowed with soft light, and for the first time in years, Thanksgiving felt like it was mine again. Not a reminder of betrayal, but a celebration of survival. When everyone left that night, I stood in the quiet kitchen, looking at the empty plates and smiling. The ghosts of that painful Thanksgiving were finally gone. I had turned something that once symbolized heartbreak into a memory of healing and gratitude. I turned off the lights, looked at the table one last time, and whispered to myself, "I did it." And I truly meant it. The woman who once sat there shaking and broken now sat there whole, strong, loved, and finally at peace. Sometimes, life doesn't give you revenge the way you expect. There are no big scenes or dramatic endings. Sometimes karma arrives quietly, through peace, success, and the kind of happiness that doesn't need to be shown off. That's what I learned. Daniel thought he had destroyed me that Thanksgiving when he handed me those papers in front of everyone. But in reality, that moment was the beginning of something much bigger. He ended the old version of me, and from those ashes, I built someone stronger, calmer, and far happier. That night, as I sat at my dining table 2 years later, surrounded by people who loved me for who I truly was, I understood what real closure felt like. My parents were laughing with Evan, my sister was helping the kids with dessert, and my home was full of warmth. There was no pain left in that space, only gratitude. I realized that I didn't need to prove anything to Daniel anymore. He had already seen what he lost, and that was enough. After dinner, I stepped outside for a moment, standing under the cool night sky. I could hear the laughter from inside drifting out the door, soft and genuine. I closed my eyes and smiled. For the first time, I felt complete peace. No anger. No sadness. Just acceptance. The woman I was back then would have wanted to see him suffer. But the woman I am now doesn't care about that. His regret is his problem. My peace is mine. I had learned that healing doesn't happen overnight. It takes time, silence, and self-love. There were nights when I cried myself to sleep, mornings when I couldn't get out of bed, and days when I questioned if I would ever feel okay again. But every step forward mattered. Every small victory, every laugh, every peaceful morning, every quiet evening without pain, built me back piece by piece. Now I have everything I once wished for, just in a different form. Love that's steady. Work that fulfills me. Family that never left my side. And most importantly, a sense of calm that nothing and no one can take away. Daniel, on the other hand, ended up alone, still searching for something real. That's not my victory, it's his lesson. Before going back inside, I took a deep breath and looked up at the stars. I thought about how much had changed since that awful Thanksgiving. Back then, I thought my world had ended. But standing there now, I knew it had only begun. Sometimes, the worst day of your life clears the path for the best version of yourself to walk forward. As I returned to the table and Evan smiled at me, I knew one truth deep in my heart. The best revenge isn't hurting someone back. It's living so well, so fully, and so peacefully that the person who broke you can only watch from a distance, wishing they hadn't.